Now, if you've played any of these games, you'll understand there is a heavy emphasis on themes such as love and hatred, death and survival, loss and companionship. Loss, I think, is explored with prominence in all of these games' main characters, be they our brooding protagonists who we journey through the stories with, or the wonderful antagonists who drive our heroes forward. But what I think a lot of people forget is that the initial loss and heartbreak is just the first domino in the arcs of these characters. And what is really puppeting them behind the scenes, subtly influencing every decision, is grief. Now, grief is a weird one because for our very headstrong characters, it remains hidden under the surface of something else. Something like revenge for Abby, brotherhood for Deacon, and fatherhood in the case of dear old Kratos. It seems so obvious that Abby's motivation is around vengeance and, in her mind, justice done right in an unjust world. You killed my father, therefore I'm going to kill you, and that will bring some measure of balance to the scales of justice in my mind. It seems obvious that Deacon continues to survive and fight, as he's still in that fight with his brother in arms. He wouldn't let anything happen to him. He can't. Otherwise, what does he have left? It seems obvious that Kratos will journey with Atreus to protect him above all, as is his duty as his father. I'm not denying that these forces are pushing our characters forward. It would be foolish to suggest otherwise. However, I'd like to say that what is truly guiding them, that invisible chain that is covertly tugging at their necks, is grief. Those three forces, revenge, brotherhood, and fatherhood, are all powerful motivators in their own right. However, I think the way that Abby, Deacon, and Kratos deal with grief is to get a clearer insight into their souls, perceptions, and choices. So today we are going to explore how grief guides these characters in different ways, but on similar journeys. Before we truly begin this study, let's talk a little about grief. No one among us is above grief. No one is better than grief. To me, grief is as inevitable and definitive as our own mortality. It can strip the strongest among us down to broken shells. It can perpetually alter us throughout life if left unchecked. It cannot be tamed. It cannot be beaten. What is worse for some is that grief lingers. It remains. It is one of the most powerful forces that we can experience. Accepting grief is terrifying. It is terrifying because you are admitting to the universe that it is bigger than you and you are powerless against it and its functions and its forces. It's taking a moment to think and know deep down internally, I am in deep pain. This hurts. And I am sad, and I feel like nothing can be done about it. It somewhat goes against our natural ability to make sure that we are okay. We may think along the lines of, if I can distract myself with X, Y, and Z, then I won't have to feel this harrowing emptiness. It feels unnatural to let grief take the reins for a spell because the person you were before grief is no longer in control. You might feel like the old you is disappearing or simply has less agency. When you feel like you are not fully in control of your own existence because of the weight of loss, to accept grief feels like the worst choice there could possibly be. You'd rather fight, you'd rather stuff it down and remember who you were and your perception of life before all of this. You would prefer to still have that agency, that control on your existence. Accepting grief is just accepting pain, and to some, they would rather die. With that out of the way, let's begin with Abby. Chronologically, we are first introduced to Abby in a flashback to a time that runs parallel to the events of The Last of Us Part 1. In this glimpse into the past, we see a version of Abby who seems, to the best of one's ability in a world like The Last of Us, to be enjoying a happy and potentially hopeful existence. Abby was born in a post-outbreak world, raised by her father and growing up with the Fireflies in Salt Lake City. I imagine that Abby must have felt a great sense of belonging in this tribe. She was part of a community that was trying to save the world. It must have felt such an honor to experience this life, knowing the cruelty of man and the remorseless cordyceps virus were outside her home. She had friends, family, and romantic relationships. She had stability, purpose, and community. Her future life in Seattle and the WLF pales in comparison to her youth. In a world like The Last of Us, you couldn't hope for more. This is her perception of her own existence. The colors and serene background chosen by the developers really helps bring this out. Up until this point, we haven't seen anything quite like this. We obviously passed through Salt Lake City with Joel and Ellie, and we shared with them one of the most wonderful moments in cinematic gaming. But it was still just Joel and Ellie, isolated, battle-worn, and traumatized. In the flashback to Abby's past, we feel the humanity of this group, the camaraderie and the close personal bonds of a group of people who are surviving as well as they can. It feels happy, which is strange to say in a world that ripped near all the happiness away from the ones who still live in it. The flashback is bright and beautiful. We share with Abby a touching scene of her father, a surgeon, rescuing a trapped zebra. We see her relationship with Owen as one that is of budding love and joy, a far cry to what we find it to be at the beginning of the game. Now, previously, we've only been able to compare the community of Jackson Town to the quarantine zone cities. Jackson has this cozy winter feel. It feels like it's tucked away from the rest of the world. One might make a gentle comparison to the nomad clans of the cyberpunk universe. Comparatively, the quarantine zones are dull, quiet, and authoritarian. People just exist there, whereas with the Fireflies and Abby here in Salt Lake City, there is a sense of hope in the world, the potential to do better, which is highlighted with the rescuing of the zebra and reuniting it with its newborn child. Now, some who aren't Abby's biggest fans would argue that this scene serves as a token piece, an attempt to humanize Abby in vain after experiencing the first half of the game. And they're only slightly correct. Of course, the aim is to humanize Abby, but this is not in vain. This is the whole point of the story. Abby wasn't always the relentless, vengeful killer we see her at the start of the game. Her character, her perception of life, and her destiny was fundamentally burned to the ground. Her understanding of life and direction was broken so completely by the murder of many of her friends and father. The Abby we meet at the beginning of The Last of Us Part 2 has been morphed and guided by grief. She mourns the life she once knew, a happy and hopeful life. Take Joel and Ellie out of the picture and focus solely on what happens to Abby. I will say it again. Friends, dead. father dead, life, home, and purpose thrown into the cosmic wind. This unfathomable level of trauma and loss is something only a few of us around the world may ever experience. So, what happens next? Well, I think it is fair to say that Abby's past sense of self, the identity of her life, died that day. She and her remaining friends moved to Seattle and took up with the WLF, and during the next 5 years, grief controlled her every waking moment. I think in the case of Abby, and also Ellie, as they are basically two sides of the same coin, but I might do a separate video on Ellie another time. It is safe to say that she is psychologically and literally weaponized by her grief. Abby probably felt like she didn't have a choice. The immense pain of the grief directed her toward action. Grief guided her to balance the scales of justice. To find and kill Joel would have been a goal towards self-repair and restoring order. Abby doesn't bury the loss down where it can't be found. It becomes a set of armor that she dons for war against the world. Just look at the change in body shape between when we first meet Abby chronologically to when we see her in the present. On the surface, it may seem like vengeance is the driving force in play here, but behind all this rage and retribution is the mourning of a lost perception of life. What we see is the rebellion against the disruption of the natural flow of life. Now, what do I mean by that? I would take what I'm about to say here with a pinch of salt, as the universe of The Last of Us is a world where violence and death are more ingrained in life than they are in our reality. However, the natural flow of life, again, it's about perception. Never in life do you expect your parent to be suddenly murdered. Never in life would you dream that this world-shattering event would happen to you. Whether we like it or not, we tend to have a subconscious image of what our lives should be like. Now, the details might be a bit blurry, but you certainly don't anticipate unexpected loss. We have a predetermined view on the direction of life, what we typically expect, and I'm breaking this down into a very simple generalization, is in a conflict-free life, our grandparents live and have our parents who then have us. Our grandparents eventually die, and our parents enter the twilight of their lives as we have children. Once our parents die, we become grandparents as our children take up our mantle, and so on and so forth. We grieve when things happen that don't fit the narrative that we once had for ourselves. Abby is no different. She rejects this new world after Joel. The strings that pull her to taking Joel's life is grief disguised as vengeance. As Abby discovers, the revenge itself is bitter. It does not undo the past. She was unable to process the sheer amount of loss, and it warped her. I just want to take a second to listen to a few seconds of the basement scene between Abby and Joel. Listen to the pain in her enunciations. She sounds like behind the rage, she could burst into tears.
Joel Miller.
Who are you?
Guess.
Why don't you say whatever speech you got rehearsed? Get this over with.
Tourniquet his leg. Do it.
fucking move. God! Damn it!
Clear out. You stupid old man. You don't get to rush this.
I'm going to use a metaphor throughout this video which I hope makes as much sense to you as it does for me. I'd like you to imagine you're in the ocean, close to a beach. You tread water as you watch a large and intimidating wave build up towards you. Not a tsunami level or anything, just a big beach wave. Grief is that wave, and there are a few actions that you can do from here. Abby has been driven to action by grief. She thinks that by fighting she will overcome her grief. Abby is that beachgoer who tries to jump and dive over the large wave. As one may imagine, this does not lead to a positive result. Abby is caught off balance and is slammed backwards and into the sand beneath her. None of her actions in an attempt to fight grief had a positive effect on her, her friends, or her new life in Seattle. So far, this discussion has mainly covered how Abby's attempt to fight against her grief directed her toward self-destruction. She reduced her base humanity to fit the persona she needed in order to survive and carry out her revenge. Her relationships with her friends deteriorated. The love that was once shared between Owen and herself was suppressed. The relationship she had with herself is dead. Abby, when we meet her and for the majority of her part of the playthrough, is not happy. She's found no closure. The weight of grief would be too much to take on alone at this time. At least in this state, she still feels in control. Her fight and flight system is still very much engaged. This is not a person who has returned to equilibrium following loss. The change comes when she meets Lev and Yara, two outcasts from the opposite faction who are on the run. Remember, at this point, Abby has no agency. She feels like she has nothing left. The only purpose she has at this point is to try and find Owen, and we start to see the suppressed love start to effervesce after such a long time. We start to see a dramatic change in character direction in Abby's playthrough. The rage to kill Joel simmers down, and what we see Abby take on next is to save and to help. Save Owen, save Lev and Yara. But why? Why do this? Well, I think it is because the relationship Abby has with grief changes. She is still lost and broken, but after seeing that fighting and raging doesn't bring her any comfort, she instead starts to behave empathetically. She tries to build instead of destroy. She mourns the bright-eyed girl she once was. There is no going back to that time or to that identity, but perhaps she can find a middle ground. Perhaps by swimming with the grief, she may find purpose again. She may find happiness again. She may find love again. She did everything she could to make the past horrors seem more palatable to her current reality. As Kratos tells us and Boulder in God of War 4, vengeance brings us no peace. We all know the old proverb, before embarking on a journey of revenge, dig 2 graves. Abby buried Joel, and in the process buried the person she was permanently. Once Abby starts to accept her new circumstances and new purpose with Lev following the end of the war between the WLF and the Seraphites, the pain that she was carrying for over 5 years begins to dwindle. The scars may remain, but in the end she chooses to stop fighting against the loss of her friends, father, home, and self. Instead, after losing everything, she lets grief transform into hope. Hope that she can find a new and better life for her new family. I will talk about this a lot more later, but I think Days Gone is an incredibly underrated gem. It certainly has its shortcomings, but on the whole, it was a fantastic experience that has really made me think about where the series could go next if it gets a sequel. When I've spoken with friends about Days Gone, there has always been some criticism, or rather just simply joking about the character of Deacon. The typical consensus amongst my friends is that Sam Witwer gave a good to great performance of what was available to him. However, it is in the larger writing of his whole character where they think Deacon falls short. One argument from one of my friends really stuck with me and led to me including Deacon in this essay. They put forward that they thought that Deacon was a pretty one-note character throughout the entire game, that despite the big change at the end of Act 2 and the change of pace and direction throughout Act 3, Deacon remains this grouchy, pessimistic, antisocial asshole. That his speech toward the end of the game feels unearned and almost insincere. At first, I thought that was an unfair critique. I thought the writers had laid Deacon out as an antisocial, almost lone ranger from the get-go. Hell, he even mentions that in his past life he didn't have a cell phone and was the only one with a landline left in Farewell. He already made a deliberate choice to leave a community, the army, and choose the life of a nomad before he even joined the MC. I thought Deacon was set up to be somebody who enjoys his own personal space, someone who doesn't rely on others, someone who prefers to go at it alone. The only person at his wedding to Sarah was Boozer. That's it. This is a man who reserves his love and attention to only the ones who he believes will continue to have a serious impact on his life. He is a man who knows exactly what he wants and who he wishes to share his life with. However, after deliberating on my friend's words, I did find that I started to agree with him. In the post-outbreak world of Days Gone, there are very, very few survivors who are currently surviving by themselves or in groups of less than 3, Deacon and Boozer being a slight anomaly to this. I say slight anomaly because Deacon and Boozer don't completely hang it out alone. They definitely make use of survivor camps for supplies and purpose. My point is that in this world it pays to be part of a pack, a tribe. Your base survival chances increase exponentially by forming close bonds and helping a community survive. So as the game's story progresses, especially when you meet the Lost Lake camp and start doing jobs for Ricky and Iron Mike, or the militia camps which Sarah is affiliated with, I still do feel like Deacon should have been more open to being a team player. I felt like he should have wanted to help people. After all, he is not a complete asshole. He does show he cares in small intervals. Obviously, he cared about his battle brothers in the army, dragging their dead bodies out of the water in Afghanistan. He obviously cared about Lisa, making sure to take her to a survivors camp to make sure that she survived. His relationship with Boozer is clearly full of love. He secretly cares about minor characters like Manny, Addie, and even Taylor, I would argue. Now, at my age, I've really lowered my walls, and if I care about someone or a group, I make it known. I think sharing love is one of the most adult things you can do. Hiding your care behind a wall of "I don't give a fuck" seems almost a bit strange to me these days. Well, not strange objectively. I understand that one might have walls up in this area, which is completely respectable. However, in my humble opinion, it is nearly always good to let someone know you care. But anyways, what does all this have to do with grief? Well, I started thinking about if Deacon really was this one-note character whose walls never seem to drop just because that's who he is. After all, any good character should experience change and growth that the audience can embark on them with. It gets difficult to care about a character sincerely if they don't give a damn about anyone or anything. To care is to be human. In order to empathize, we have to see someone care about something small or large. So I started thinking about more stagnant characters in general, poorly written or purposefully done so to show a larger theme at play. If you're looking for a piece of art that should rock you to your core, I'd recommend you go check out Manchester by the Sea. That film expertly shows you how your fight and flight system can be so overwhelmed that you freeze. I now look at Deacon and think he was deliberately written as this brooding, arms-at-length hard-ass for a very specific reason. Not to show how less of a shit he could give and therefore about how tough he is, but rather to show how hard he did care and how much he lost. To show how fresh the wounds still are to him, so fresh he hasn't even tried applying metaphorical bandages to them yet. He simply watches as his soul bleeds out of him. So, let's go into this a bit more to get a sense of what I'm getting at here. Earlier I mentioned how it appears obvious that Deacon's motivator for surviving would appear to be a code of honor to his brother Boozer. It is his mission to make sure nothing happens to Boozer, as you would for your actual brother. But aside from keeping Boozer alive, Deacon doesn't appear to have any motivations in the first act of the game. He just exists. He does missions for survival camps to get supplies, to keep on living, to do more jobs for camps to keep on living, and so on and so forth. If Deacon does have any other purpose in this first act, I would argue that it is to remember Sarah. After all, there are several optional side missions that are about visiting her resting place and talking to her grave. It is also mentioned that Deacon spends nights simply just looking at the last photo he has of Sarah. In all flashbacks of Deacon and Sarah's past, it has this literal rosy colour added. You could not be more on the nose with the idea of looking at things through rose-tinted glasses. And, as with Abby, there is a reason for this. It is to show the stark difference in perception between the time before loss and grief and the present in which it sits on their chest. Unlike Abby, Deacon does not have a relatively tangible thing he can direct his rage and regret onto. He doesn't have a Joel. In his mind, the world took Sarah from him, and he can't kill the world. I would argue that Deacon is unable to get himself out of this hole in his mind. This well of guilt and grief, there is simply too much damage there. Him and his brother Boozer are not exactly open with their emotions and prefer to keep things buried beneath the surface, to try and ride it out. There is definitely a sense of pride between them both, which is something I'm sure I'll explore in another video. But behind this bravado, what is really going on here for Deacon? There are still definitely elements of his care that exist. He goes out of his way to rescue Lisa, he gives her a thunder egg, rescues her from the Rippers and takes her to Lost Lake, all pretty much off his own back. But what is he actually doing for himself? Next to nothing. Before finding out that O'Brien lives and begins to investigate what happened to Sarah properly, Deacon really has nothing going on for him personally. He keeps going with Boozer for the sake of it, and he says as much on the bike ride to Lost Lake.
But do you know why we keep going?
No.
Because what the hell else are we gonna do?
Yeah.
Before the main plot of Days Gone properly starts, Deacon has been crushed by grief. He doesn't really know what to do next. I genuinely believe that without the anchor of Boozer, Deacon would have died a long time ago, from a lack of self-care or perhaps on a darker note by taking his own life. In this way, I see similarities between Deacon pre-O'Brien and Joel pre-Ellie. Both simply seem to exist with no clear goal in mind. When we take a look at Deacon's interactions with nearly all of the survivors in Days Gone, we can see that a majority of his relationships seem very transactional. He doesn't give a lot away with how he feels about these characters. In fact, I'd say he's kind of a dick for the most part. We are introduced to the character Manny early on in the game, who mistakenly parts out Deacon's bike. Deacon, understandably, is not impressed and berates Manny and Copeland for their actions. Now, yes, in the game, you can improve your relationship with the camps and by extension unlock better dialogue with the camp vendors, but throughout the game, Deacon treats Manny as a bit of a nuisance. Deacon is constantly bickering with everyone he encounters and is notoriously not easy to get along with. Hell, he and Boozer find it difficult to communicate about how they are actually doing. He keeps everyone at arm's reach. Why? In a world where cooperation is a survival tactic, why try to alienate yourself from everyone? Why try and reinforce the idea that camp life is not for you and is a shithole? I think Ricky sums up his current nature best when she says, "You've got a good side, Deke. You just try your best to kill it." Deacon makes deliberate attempts to keep people away from him. He doesn't want any new friends, mentors, or close ones to care about, as he is terrified of losing anyone else. Remember, Deacon blames himself for Sarah's death. Deacon's aloofness and angst is the guilt and grief that he holds deep within him. He's frozen solid by it. By keeping himself away from any more personal bonds, Deacon's grief is guiding him to what he thinks is security and mental safety. And he keeps this up throughout the game's entire story. I think Deacon associates attachment with pain, and is why he struggles to form any new, meaningful bonds in the story. Now, Deacon certainly is far more of a motivated character after encountering O'Brien for the first time. After meeting O'Brien and discovering that Sarah's helicopter was directed somewhere else during the breakout, Deacon is invigorated with new momentum to find out what actually happened to his wife. He battles with himself over whether or not there is a slim chance that she could have possibly survived. And here I'd say that Deacon is motivated by blind hope. He knows it is improbable, but not necessarily impossible. But I would ask you this: what do you think caused this initial curiosity? He followed Nero, eavesdropped and heard O'Brien's name mentioned, and proceeded to follow them again, on the off chance that this was the same O'Brien from 2 years ago. For a man whose main needs are about not starving and not being torn to shreds, this comes across as desperation. Desperation for what though? Answers? Sure, but what does that grant one? I would argue that Deacon's curiosity with Nero is about trying to achieve the closure he missed out on for 2 years. As Boozer says, he hopes tracking Nero will bring him some peace. The drive to conclude what happened to Sarah is really a way to try and get some closure and lighten his grief. Okay, so I've talked a lot about Deacon here, and I want to bring us back to that wave metaphor for grief that I talked about at the end of Abby's section. Now, although I'm mainly talking about Deacon pre-O'Brien, I think his character has been irreparably altered by his trauma, and we see this throughout the entire game. He is a damaged character. I want you to imagine a beachgoer that has swam out just a bit in a tropical country. There is not too much water beneath them, but enough for them to tread water without kicking any sand underneath them. I want you to imagine that that beachgoer is Deacon, and he is watching a big old wave come towering above him. Deacon is literally and metaphorically not a particularly strong swimmer. He doesn't feel like he has the skills to evade this situation, so what does he do? Nothing. The answer is nothing. He freezes. You remember me talking about fight, flight, and freeze? This wave, this metaphorical wave of overwhelming grief, rises above him and comes crashing down. Deacon is smashed around and has the wind driven out of him. He's in such a state of shock and fear that he doesn't realize another wave is hurtling towards him. By not taking any action to accept his grief, he just keeps getting battered by it. There is no closure for staying in the sea and getting hit by wave after wave. For Deacon to have a more enjoyable swim, and I really mean a better life, he must learn to acknowledge the grief before facing into it. I'm really interested to see where Deacon's story goes and how his character develops in a possible sequel. I'd love to see a bit more emotion behind him other than rage and a face that tells near everyone to fuck off. Don't get me wrong, I'm absolutely here for strong male characters, but as we will see with our next character, you can definitely marry up the strong with the vulnerable. For our final entry in this video, we are going to look at one of, if not my favourite characters in video game history, the rogue god Kratos. Now, I developed a great personal love of this character with the reboot in 2018. I've always admired how they turned a perceived one-note raging killing machine into a stoic and vulnerable father, struggling to find his place in a new world with a new family and new enemies. I will be more than happy to talk about the entire relationship between Kratos and Atreus in another video, as it is perhaps my favourite dynamic between two characters in a game. But for now, let's focus on Kratos. Immediately, as we start God of War 2018, grief is at the forefront. We watch Kratos slowly and mournfully chop down the final tree for his recently departed wife. Each tree has been personally hand-marked by Faye. He carries the tree sorrowfully back home with his young son, Atreus. The loss between them is still incredibly raw. The two do not know each other very well, and their conversation is sparse and challenging. They do not know how to communicate with one another. Kratos is especially reserved with his words. Atreus attempts to break the silence with questions. He is curious by nature, but his efforts are met with short, blunt responses. As we have already explored, people mourn in varying ways. There is a truly excellent line in God of War Ragnarok from Faye, when she says to grieve deeply is to have loved fully. And that is what Kratos is doing throughout the entire game. He is mourning in intense silence. His new life in Midgard has been centered around his wife and new son. Done are the days of destroying pantheons and running through amazing superstructures to find some new tool to aid him on his next quest. His simple life in this quiet forest, in his small cabin, is the reality that Kratos now lives. And he enjoyed this isolation in the company of Faye, a woman who he met with initially in a short battle and soon fell in love with. To a man like Kratos, finding love again, I imagine, felt like an impossibility. Something undeserved for such a destructive and violent life. If any of you watching have felt great shame because of your actions and found that you still have people caring about you afterwards, it can truly change your perspective on life. You feel that self-loathing really starts to chip away from your core. You understand that you have a second chance, even though you may feel like you don't deserve one. This is the first person who has not tried to use or kill Kratos in many years. The trust and faith he must have had in her after all the betrayals and destruction of his past. There is no doubt that Kratos felt like a different man once he met Faye. And this is the gift that Faye gave to Kratos, a second chance of life, to move on from the monster he felt within himself. Kratos may not be an avid conversationalist, but his actions to carry his wife's ashes to the tallest peak in all the realms, no matter the adversary, speaks volumes about his love for his wife, and, by extension, how much he misses her. For a man who was so callous with the life of others and his own life in the Greek installments, it is powerful to see him so human in this story. Whilst we do not have flashbacks to Kratos' past with Faye in this game, we feel the weight of Faye throughout the plot. Her death, actions, everything. Her death leads to the cutting down of the protection stave in the woods, Balder tracking them down on the hunt for the last Jotnar, Kratos and Atreus being forced to flee their home and begin the quest to find the highest peak in all the realms, which in turn leads to the reunion of the Huldra brothers, the death of Balder, the start of Fimbulwinter, and subsequently Ragnarok, the end of the world and the twilight of the gods. In the same way that we, the player, feels the connection to Faye throughout this journey, so does Kratos. Everything, even his son, is a reminder of his loss, and he lost more than just a wife. He lost his friend, his confidant, his shepherd towards a more peaceful existence. I mean, in Ragnarok, in Alfheim, Kratos hears her voice in the Pillar of Light and hypnotically goes towards it. Visually speaking, the writers are shouting at you that she is his guide, his North Star in the sky. Simply put, Faye is his rock, and we start Kratos' new story with a rock that's no longer there. Okay, so now we understand a bit more about what Kratos lost when Faye died. Let's explore how grief guides Kratos. Unlike in the Greek saga, there is no great tragedy and betrayal that leads to the death of his first family. From what we understand, Faye simply passes away one day from potentially a sickness. There is no one to blame. No denial, and no epic quest to rescue her spirit from the Lake of Souls. The world continues as it should, and all that changes in that moment is the perception of life that Kratos had. If we put the general plot of the game to the side for a second and think about how Kratos is dealing with his grief, we find little resistance. Upon first meeting Mimir, he tells him that Faye is dead, rather quickly. His goal is to honor his wife in death by spreading her ashes from the tallest peak in all the realms. Kratos does not hide from this reality. He may not like it, and as everyone would, he dearly misses his wife, but he doesn't shy away from the loss. We can immediately see the difference in the skills he's learned in dealing with grief. He is calm, quiet, and silently sad. This is what works for him now. He feels no need to rage so hard that he destroys the world. And importantly, he doesn't do nothing. He takes action. He has agency post-grief. Now, I think there is a strong argument to make that the anchor that Faye represented shifted to his son. He can't give up. He must protect Atreus. Unlike Deacon, who still had Boozer, Kratos does not let his grief consume him and stop him. He quickly starts to understand that there is a new life with Atreus that he must focus on. This is where the argument that fatherhood is Kratos' main motivator comes into play. Once again, I repeat myself, I think it is certainly present. But if we look a little deeper, we can see that it is a change in life and perspective post-loss that leads to the development of their relationship. Kratos had 11 years to develop a relationship with his son before Faye died, and he doesn't. He stays very emotionally distant away from Atreus in an attempt to protect him from the curse that is godhood. Now, we can speculate on whether or not their relationship would have developed more as Atreus got older, but judging from what we see, Kratos was determined to keep himself and his history as far away from Atreus as possible. As soon as he is forcefully shoved into the role of full-time dad, Kratos attempts to start bonding with Atreus in the ways that he knows how. Battle doctrine and bettering oneself. Although their relationship is certainly still tense for the first act of the game, Kratos makes small steps to lowering his guard with Atreus. He begins coaching him in the way of the soldier. The road ahead is cold and unforgiving, no place for a boy. You must be a warrior. He gently teaches Atreus to be more in the present and not to wander lost in his own mind. He keeps Atreus focused on the goal and the journey, challenging him to better himself. Exploring the Lake of Nine with Atreus, Kratos teaches Atreus lessons in leadership and trusting the word of strangers. Of course, Kratos in many areas may not appear to be particularly skilled in bonding with Atreus, but there is movement, there is effort, and actually there is a desire to as well. If we come back to the flow of life that I talked about earlier with Abby, and we think about Kratos' circumstances, what might we ascertain? Well, again, a spouse's death occurring out of the blue does push against our idea of the narrative of life. It's not something we put in our metaphysical calendars. We all know eventually we will pass on, but we do not envision that happening to our close ones until it is narratively acceptable, when they are ill or old. Faye's death may have been her destiny, but to the unknowing Kratos, this is not what he thought would happen in that moment. I think Kratos' experience as a god has helped develop his skills in dealing with grief immeasurably. This is a man who has seen it all, the death of his entire family, mother, brother, wife, daughter, and wife again. That's not including all the family that he kills. He's seen the worst of humanity and the gods. He's seen the world end at his hands, and on top of this, he has lived for hundreds, if not thousands of years between Greece and his new life in Midgard. This kind of experience tends to give one a greater perspective on life itself. Providing you don't let it destroy you, one can learn a lot from trauma. and I think that Kratos has had years to process the unpredictability and unfairness of life, which is why we see him, for the most part, composed and stoic, if not ruminating in the quiet. I think it is important that we acknowledge the strength of character here with Kratos. We know he is unfathomably tough, if not indestructible. But to lose another loved one and to not spiral, instead opting to slowly lower his walls and learn to be more vulnerable in front of his son, all the while trying to show him what it is to be a man and a god, and how to survive in a cruel and unforgiving world. Kratos had a lot to juggle in the Norse saga, and it is a true testament to his inner mental strength as well as his obvious physical strength. The writers of God of War do not sugarcoat the devastation of loss in the Norse saga. Balder is driven to insanity by his loss of feeling. Freya and Sindri are as broken as Abby is during God of War Ragnarok. These extraordinarily powerful characters are all brought low by their grief, even the gods. They too are powerless against it. So to see grief be accepted and used to better Kratos' life and his relationship with Atreus was such a fantastic story. It is one of the main reasons I've played God of War 2018 probably 15 times through. Truly an amazing understanding of character and humanity. I ask once again that we go back to that beach imagery that we discussed earlier. We know the setup now. We have a swimmer in the water, Kratos. Same situation. A large and daunting wave is rolling up to Kratos, a wave that he cannot stop with all of his godly strength. However, this Kratos is different from our previous swimmers. He has been in this situation before. He has already fought the wave and lost everything. So in the case of this metaphor, I like to imagine that Kratos is the one who dives under the wave before swimming back to shore. There is action on his part, but he doesn't inherently resist the overwhelming force of the wave. He chooses an action that allows him to move with the wave. The action doesn't leave him off balance or at complete submission to the crushing power of the wave. He accepts the wave is coming and allows himself to move through the water with the wave. I hope this metaphor makes as much sense to you as it did for me when I was coming up with this video. Kratos is the perfect fictional example of how any of us, even the strong and greats, can be maneuvered against their will by grief. The difference is, by the time we rejoin him in God of War 2018, the character has matured enough to recognize how best to live with grief. I think that really sums up what I've been talking about for the past 45 minutes or so. Everyone can learn to live with grief. However, it is their relationship with their grief that dictates their actions accordingly. When studying these characters, you will notice they all fit a relatively similar archetype: a physically strong, cards close to their chest survivor. Now, there are certainly large differences between them as they are not carbon copies of one another, but I thought it would be such a great discussion piece to see how these three are guided by grief instead of the surface level revenge, brotherhood, and fatherhood. And after looking at them all, we can fit them into three categories: the fighter, the broken, and the healer. You all will encounter grief throughout your life, and it will change you. It will stay with you. It can tire you and break you. It is a daunting thought. However, I will leave you with this. From my experience, it doesn't matter how cutting the wound is. It is about how you choose to carry grief with you. Hold the good close to you, and work towards something that is better and brighter. Wow, okay, so that's it. That is my first essay, my first video, my first anything on this channel. It was a lot of fun dissecting these characters and my ideas about them and looking into what the writers have given us to make these conclusions. If you've made it all the way to the end, then thank you. I hope you enjoyed and possibly see these characters in a slightly different light than maybe you used to. So now in this afterthought, I'd like to talk a bit more about the channel, the motivation, the goal, and the future. So forgive me if this is a bit more of a stream of consciousness than anything else. This channel is really just a passion project that I've been too frozen with fear to attempt before. You know, there's always been something else going on that stops me, but the truth is I've just been too hesitant. And topically, it took me going through some recent grief to actually hit what I call the fuck it button, and to actually buy what I need and go talk about the things that interest me. And no, someone close to me hasn't died recently, but what I will talk about a lot here is that grief comes in all shapes and sizes. Grief is a response to loss, and loss happens all the time. One can grieve when they move house after many years. You can grieve internally about the person you once were or the life you once had. This can lead to self-loathing. You can grieve after the end of a relationship, as the narrative of what your life was going to be with someone has now drastically changed. And of course, the most obvious form of grieving is the loss of life. Now, what did it for me was the end of a relationship recently. I am no longer with my now ex-girlfriend. I've always wondered why I feel motivated to do something different with my life at the end of a relationship. It's strange. Maybe it's I'm gonna leave and travel, or I'm gonna learn to ride a motorcycle. It's usually some variation of I'm gonna throw myself into something completely. Whether you do or don't go through with these thoughts, I feel like we all typically sit on these big thoughts of motivation towards change. And what's happened is I've just done what I said to myself I was going to do. I've started a channel and made a video that I wanted to make, all because of grief. I am currently grieving the loss of that relationship. My ideas of what my life was looking like has changed a lot in my personal life. Work ticks on the same, my hobbies and sports all tick over the same, but the narrative I had in my head about what my personal life was, is, and will be has changed. And I've had to process that. I'm okay though. Some days are good, some days are not so good, but I'm not in the same deep pain that I have been in before in my life. I believe I am better skilled in handling grief than I once was. Anyways, my point is that we all grieve, even the things that don't seem so large in comparison to actually losing a loved one. And I decided this time around that I would let my relationship with grief motivate me into an action that I was too afraid of before. This channel is going to be a bit of a passion project experiment. I truly love character and story analysis, so expect more essays in that vein. But I also might do some old-fashioned let's plays of some of these great story games, again with a bit more of a stream of consciousness commentary. It is just exciting to think about it all really, so I'll just go wherever the river takes me. However, there is one thing I want for this channel, and that's for those watching to think even just a little differently about mental health and dealing with shit. The formats for my videos won't be purely analytical. There will be speculation, and I will be inputting my own opinion on how I think these characters work. I will try to, at the end of my videos, try maybe talk a little bit about my own life and how I've possibly have encountered the topic of conversation. I think there are things that we can learn from these fictional characters that could help you out one day in a small way. For instance, I hope you've seen that the way that Kratos is able to accept and move with his grief is better for you than letting grief destroy you and finding solace at the bottom of a bottle. If there is a lesson to be learned from the characters, I will try and find it and explain it to you from my perspective. I would also like to highlight that no, I am not a licensed psychologist or anything like that. I'm just a guy who's done a lot of soul searching over the last few years, and yes, I've done about 4 years of therapy now. It has saved me. I honestly don't know where I'd be without learning to process my crap, and if I can pass on some potential nuggets of wisdom that I've learned about in my life, then that is what I will try and do at the end of these essays, again, if applicable. If anything, maybe I'll speak a little about my life and see if anyone in the comments resonates. If this channel can be a place that you look forward to seeing content from, then that's wicked. Speaking of this, I unfortunately have encountered incredibly overwhelming grief in my life. I lost my dad about age 12, and that really took me down for the count. I understand the hole that loss can leave on you, which is part of the motivation of this essay. If any of you are going through grief, big or small, and you have stumbled upon this video, make sure you have some time for yourself. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. Things won't be the same, but you will be okay. Make sure you accept your grief, your pain, your sadness, and your rage. It's okay to feel and to mourn. If you need to mourn deeply, then do so. You have every right. All I will leave you with here is don't try and fight or bury grief. You can't win, neither work, I've tried. Allow yourself to feel and to change and to keep your loved ones close. Anyways, on a more upbeat note, let me talk a little bit about the immediate plan for the channel. As I said, I'm really going to go with the flow and see where I end up, so be prepared for either some similar content or maybe some Let's Plays of my favourite games. In terms of video essays, I will explore God of War a bit more scarcely, only because other channels have covered it already so well. If there's a fresh take I can give, then absolutely. But I'm probably going to start with looking at more kind of Days Gone characters and their motivations and the plot and the story. As I've said, I think Days Gone is a bit of an underrated gem. I think an apt comparison is I feel the same way about Days Gone as I do about Star Wars Revenge of the Sith. I really like Revenge of the Sith, I really do, but there are also some glaring problems with it. But every time I watch it, I stand up and I think, that was a great experience. There's so much to talk about with that movie. Days Gone has its story issues. No, not the on-release bug issues, story issues. But I still really enjoy it, and I think there's more to uncover about the characters in that game. I particularly want to take a look into Iron Mike and why he's written far better than most of the characters in that game. I also want to look into Mass Effect, the characters and the plot. Again, just one of my favourite series ever. So much to explore there with the volume of different crewmates and their loyalty missions and romances. I cannot express how much I love that series. Would be great to possibly do a playthrough there. I might look into characters like Handsome Jack from the Borderlands games, maybe Talion and Celebrimbor from the Shadow of Mordor games. Oh right, yeah, of course, more from characters like The Last of Us, Red Dead Redemption, Cyberpunk, maybe some other things like Until Dawn, Darksiders, hell, maybe even some 40k stuff, you know, if it works. Basically, if there is a character or a theme that I like, I'll take a look into it. But yeah, I think that about wraps things up. Once again, I do hope you enjoyed, and if you are interested in following the channel and my attempts to make content, then please do give it a subscribe and a thumbs up. Looking forward to taking the journey with a few of you. Best wishes, lots of love to you all. Catch you later.